Hello and welcome to The Racer's Edge, coming to you in association with F1 Racing Magazine, still from Malaysia, a few days after the race. Well, this one is going to run and run, so let's get right down to it. To my mind, there were two major issues resulting from the events of Sunday, a little bit overlapping, but in reality they shouldn't be confused. And the first goes to the heart not only of motorsport but also of sport in general, in my view. This was not about a number 2 driver being asked to give the race lead to his number 1 by his team, as we've seen the Ferrari drivers particularly having to do over the last few years. And it wasn't about two equal number 1s fighting almost to destruction as Nelson Piquet and Nigel Mansell did in the Williams Honda days, or indeed as Alain Prost and Senna did in the McLaren Honda days as well. No, this was about a team instructing its two drivers, once they'd achieved a certain domination of the race, by which I mean the 3rd and 4th place getters were in fuel-saving mode and backing away. Mark Webber had basically won this race. He'd taken the advantage in the first stint. He'd stayed out a little bit longer. Maybe you could say that was luck, maybe you could say that was judgment, but he was out there. He defended well, his pit stops were good, his strategy was good, he was in the lead, and the order came out for both drivers to back away, to conserve their cars, to conserve fuel, to conserve tyres, as indeed, of course, everybody has to in 2013. And this was about what drove Gilles Villeneuve to distraction at Imola in 1982. Having backed away, Mark then had Sebastian Vettel pounce on him in a slightly quicker car with a slightly softer tyre, in slightly better shape probably, but at that point Mark was in race-saving mode. He wasn't in a race mode at all, as indeed Gilles wasn't at Imola. And that is unconscionable in my view, and it was no wonder that Mark was as livid as he was on the podium in Sepang. Now, to Sebastian Vettel's credit, there was one difference between Sepang, in my view, and that of Imola in '82, and that was back at Imola, Didier Pironi showed no remorse whatsoever. Indeed, he carried on as if he'd won a great victory. This was not the case with Sebastian in Sepang, although he was full of oxymorons. He was full of, well, I didn't do it deliberately, but I kind of regret doing it now, and we didn't really know where he was coming from. I asked him, I was the first guy to ask him a question after James Allen's initial queries about whether he felt now he owed a win to Mark, and he didn't answer that question either, really. No surprise there, and I guess that will be filed away, much as Mika Häkkinen's verbal obligation to David Coulthard was filed away back in 1998 when, you may recall, in the Australian Grand Prix, Mika came in inadvertently late in the race. He misheard a pit instruction, came in, he wasn't needed in the pits, he went back out again, and the team said to David, who was leading of course, would you please give the win back to Mika? And David did, on the basis that he would be given a win later in the year. Of course, the situation never arose, and I suspect that'll probably be the same with Sebastian in 2013. However, to get another view on this, let's tune into the brain of one of the most astute observers of motorsport in 2013. I refer, of course, to the world's preeminent driver coach, himself coming off a victorious weekend, Rob Wilson. Rob, what was your take on the Vettel-Webber situation in Sepang?
I think that's going to stick to Vettel, that. It was it's an unhappy situation, and you think back to some of the things that Michael did, like at Monaco and during qualifying when he stopped the car and stopped anyone else getting that result. I think that changed the perception of that people had of Michael Schumacher, if there was a positive perception at that point, and it stays in their mind. Plus the thing he did to Jacques Villeneuve in the final round of the '97 championship, and also with Damon Hill. Those things stayed with Schumacher, and it almost didn't matter how nice he was after that. It didn't quite shift things. You know, as they say, reality may change, but perception lasts forever, and I think that stays with Michael, and he says he regrets that. I think Vettel will regret doing that as well. But it'll always stay in people's mind that he can apologize all he likes. He still did it. It's like if you took someone's arm off, you would say, I regret that, I'm sorry. But the guy who's lost his arm said, well, I've still lost my arm. And so I'm not sure that helps him. You know, you wouldn't have expected a Jim Clark or someone to do that, you know, and the perception of Jim Clark will remain what it is. The perception of Sebastian, I don't think that helped him.
And indeed, just to take the example from Sunday, Nico Rosberg didn't do that to Lewis Hamilton.
No, and on the podium, Lewis had the grace to say, you know, it should be Nico standing here. I don't feel good about it. He had greater pace than me. And so he effectively gave it to Nico. So I think both drivers' stature increased as a result of that. And even if it wasn't a result that Nico wanted, and of course he made the point as he pulled in, you know, remember that. And I'm sure they will. So I think that's increased the stature of those drivers. It's just a bit troubling, and it's mainly a perception now that I think will shift. And for all of Vettel's charm and quick-wittedness, and he does have that, and the imagery of a regular bloke not being a superstar, it's always going to stay in the people back of people's mind. That so therefore, a pity, a real pity.
Rob, if Red Bull had Vettel in one car and Daniel Ricciardo in the other, or Webber in one car and Daniel Ricciardo in the other, you could argue this situation wouldn't have arisen. They've lived with this sort of semi-permanent equal number one razor's edge for the last 3 or 4 years. And I guess that's a choice a team makes when it decides what it's going to do with its other car. And if you've got two quick guys like that in a race-winning car, it will end in tears inevitably.
Well, Vettel's point will be, okay, fine, you want to make things equal in this race, but let's look back over the last few years. And how many world titles would you have won had you bet the farm on Mark Webber? That's what would have been going through his mind, thinking that I am the one who has made the most out of this car. And so therefore, you know, I am the special one here. You owe me this. If I do take the lead, you should acknowledge that the reason, one of the major reasons why we're so dominant is my own performance. Where would you have been if you'd just been with Mark? And he would have a point in that. It's just that it's just that that went just a little bit too far. I mean, but it's not abnormal. You know, even back in the Lotus days, Graham Hill was very unhappy about being asked to stay behind Jim Clark in the '67 US Grand Prix when Clark had a mechanical problem. It's always been like that, and it is a problem you're going to have.
Rob, you know Adrian Newey very well. Indeed, you know the team very well. What will Adrian's thoughts be right now?
He would not have been happy. He would have been thinking, this one time, Sebastian could have shown a bit of grace, and also, Adrian's very senior at Red Bull. We know how he's at the pinnacle of it there, and it was their choice, I assume, between Adrian and Christian, to call the race off at that point and say, look, we're worried. We got through Australia with excess tyre wear. We don't know how it's going to last to the end. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Coffee. We don't know how it's going to last. We remember what happened to Kimi last year, where the tyres fell off with 2 laps in the end. We've got a situation here. We know we can manage, and we can come 1-2 in the constructors' title. They made that order, and they were disobeyed. I think they will be equally as cross with Sebastian Vettel. I don't think Adrian will be impressed at all. But in the end, he will go, well, okay, there we go. But he'll be waiting for another circumstance to stamp his authority on that, I think.
Rob, thanks for those thoughts. Just a few other quick comments. Fernando Alonso ran into the back of Sebastian second corner. Your comments on that. And secondly, continuing and not coming in for the new nose.
Well, we all know how good Fernando is, and I know how positive you are on the show about him. We know how good he is. This view that he is the finest driver in the world on average, when you take everything into account, I've never entirely subscribed to that, and there's been occasions of clumsiness that I see from Alonso. We saw it, or arrogance of assumption. We saw it with Kimi last year. He may have lost the world title by thinking he could force Kimi into a situation last year and retired himself. I just think there's an arrogance of assumption there and a certain clumsiness. Also, he's been outperformed by Massa. So he's got to get rid of those mistakes. Now he'll eventually get on top of it, but I think and the continuation with a car like that, no, he should have come in himself. He shouldn't need to be told. Say, well, you can't really see the wing, but you know something's wrong with that car. You need to get in and get that fixed. And I just think that he lost that world title by 3 points last year, and they say, well, Fernando carried that car on his back, but I think he's also the one who lost them, and he'll be feeling the pressure now of Massa outperforming him. I think it's that the last 3 or 4 races that Massa's out-qualified him. He won't have ignored that.
Rob, we're all Kimi fans, but very disappointing that he got that penalty for impeding another driver. This is the cleanest racing driver in the world, impeding another driver.
Yeah, and I didn't see what it was that he did you? Because I missed that.
Well, he was radioed that Nico was coming up behind him. He himself was at turn 11, the entry to the slow corner, and he was pacing himself to force India in front. He says he never saw Nico. He arced into his apex. Nico had to back away, lost a couple of tenths. It wasn't enough to justify the difference between Nico and Lewis in qualifying lap, but he lost a couple of tenths, and the audio transmissions convinced Derek Warwick and the stewards that a penalty should be given.
And you do, because I missed that. And what do you think on that?
Well, I think it ruined the race for Kimi, obviously. I mean, it put him in the mire, and but I'm confused by it because Kimi is an incredibly clean and respectful driver when it comes to other cars on the circuit. It's very rare the situations where Kimi's involved in something like this. And I don't know, I think maybe Formula One's a bit guilty of radio overkill and stewards' decisions, to be honest.
Well, talking about it blind there, I think that's absolutely the case. I think once you start drawing lines like that, everybody becomes a bad guy, not regard to this situation because I didn't see it. But I'll take your word on that, obviously, or your judgment on that. If Kimi was told this, it would just be a misjudgment on his part, less clumsiness, and just a judgment that he felt, well, okay, no, I didn't know Rosberg was there, or I didn't think that was going to mess him up. So yes, well, when you look at Alonso, you look at Kimi, both races ruined. It's a case of if you can just take the mistakes out of a season, the world title is there. That's how Alonso lost his one this year. That's how probably Kimi lost a good race this time. What it reminds me of, those after Australia, you can't say if you're a racing team or a racing driver, yes, we can keep this up all year. We're going to be competitive. We're looking forward to the similar thing at the next race. None of them have a clue. If everybody knew what was going to happen, McLaren wouldn't have come out with that car that they've come out with this year, and all manner of things wouldn't make. So you can assume nothing. And in truth, for all of the strategy plans and so on, no one's got a clue what's going to happen the moment that those lights go out and they run down into the first corner. They haven't got a clue. Look at Mark Webber, actually 2 races in succession. He couldn't get off the line. Suddenly he's on the front row. Suddenly then he's 7th. Gets to the race here. The management say the race is turn your engine down. You're okay. And he gets beaten by his teammate. Nobody can make the assumptions.
And nobody could have assumed that Williams were going to be so far off the pace in the first 2 races. But Valtteri Bottas, who I know you've done a lot of work with, nearly scored a point in Malaysia. 2 difficult races for him, but he did the job.
Absolutely, he's been immaculate. This person is developing behind the scenes. He shouldn't have been developing in such an anonymous way because the car is slower than they thought. It'll be aerodynamic. They'll get to work on it. At least they know what the problem is. Again, like McLaren, there's a mistake made there somewhere, and they're working very, very hard on it. Valtteri, terrific to see. Proper rock solid race there. He has something about it. He'll have his day.
Rob, finally, congratulations in order. You just had a 1st and 3rd at St. Pete in the Indycar race with James Hinchcliffe and Marco Andretti. I say that tongue-in-cheek, of course, but I know both of those came over to do some work with you at Bruntingthorpe, and you have some more Indycar drivers coming as well.
Yes, Serbia and Hildebrand are coming over. Which would be good. They're a bit further down the line there. But Marco and Hinchcliffe, James Hinchcliffe, are terrific guys. and just great talent. Just needed to be sort of put in order a little bit. And so I'm delighted for Hinchcliffe, because he really does work at the craft. He has a great feel for the surface, and applied himself fantastically. To see him win the race was great. And Marco, yeah, fantastic car control. You can imagine being like his grandfather on the dirt tracks and the world of outlaws. He's definitely got that about him, and he's almost one of those style drivers in the modern world. And we just had to get him straightened out and say, look, let's get the car pointed this way. Let's place a bit of a value on traction, and such like, rather than car control. He was a terrific guy and really got stuck in and worked at it. And it was such a great pleasure to see a result like that. So we'll stay in touch with them. Good guys.
Well, Rob, congratulations to you on that. I know you're a busy man and you've got lots going on at the moment with various F1 teams and meetings going on, but we'll let you go. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the show in our new studio very soon.
Peter, thanks for the inclusion. Enjoy it here.
The inimitable Rob Wilson, enjoying his coffee too, good to see. Rob makes a very good point when he says nobody has a clue, and it's always fun, I think, at a Grand Prix to be there on a Thursday and you see the long faces, the stares, the silent grimaces, the meetings in the dark windows, etc., etc. And then Sunday night, Fernando Alonso's taken the nose off the car on the first lap, and that's it for Ferrari. You wonder what all those meetings and everything else was all about. Rob's absolutely correct. It's, racing is this strange dichotomy between incredible business, 500, 600 people, and then two guys going racing on Sunday afternoons and sometimes doing silly things. Just speaking of Fernando, I'd only add to Rob's point and say that I think in some ways Fernando is kind of a victim of his own aura, because we have this feeling about him that he can win a Grand Prix in a car with three wheels. And I suppose if any other driver was in the Ferrari at Sepang on Sunday and had come out of that third corner, second corner with the front wing broken the way it was, there wouldn't have been any decision. You would bring him in. But because it's Fernando Alonso, you can imagine them on the pit wall thinking, well, it's taking Mark Webber a while to get past him. Let's keep him out for a couple of laps, and we've got to bring him in anyway for dry tyres. Let's give it a go. But of course, if it's the main plane at the front that's damaged, then it's a hiding to nothing, really. Easy to say that now, sitting back here. But equally, as Rob said, sometimes Fernando needs to make those calls and just come in of his own volition. And Rob makes another very good point under this heading of none of us know. That's one of the reasons that I think Lewis Hamilton is in such great shape for this championship. Nobody's expecting brilliant things from Lewis Hamilton and AMG Mercedes, and yet already he's piling up those points. He's there or thereabouts in qualifying. Yes, the car probably has a higher wear rate on tyres than the Red Bull, and certainly it seems to have a very high fuel consumption of Petronas product. I couldn't believe Force India. They had no such issues in Sepang in the heat. And the thought occurs that maybe this is a cooling thing. Maybe they've got smaller inlets or slightly less effective radiator flow, and they run a little bit hotter, and in the heat of Sepang they had to run richer in order to get around that problem. Of course, Mercedes say that wasn't the issue at all, and I don't suppose we'll ever know. I'll never know. But equally, it is strange how much of a fuel-saving mode the two drivers, Hamilton and Rosberg, had to go in that Grand Prix. I mentioned earlier that there were two issues. The other, which shouldn't really be confused, I think, with the subject of drivers disobeying team orders and racing a teammate when that teammate is in no position to race because he's already backed off. And that other issue is the comment made by the three podium finishers that racing was not fun anymore, and that's because they're in tyre-saving, fuel-saving mode. They're constantly having to hold position, and as Mark Webber said, we're driving around at 85% and not the 99% that we used to, and Lewis Hamilton backed him up on that. And the implication there is that Pirelli are not doing the job. They're indeed robbing the Formula One fan of some of the action of the drivers driving flat out. I think that's very unfair, and I think it's a bit like saying we don't like these austerity measures, we want a new government, let's vote them in, and forgetting about the world recession and the economic crisis that occurred 4 or 5 years ago. You can't just forget about history and say, well, I'm new to the sport, I want it to be like this. Let's just have a look at the way this tyre monopoly with Pirelli came about. Let's go back to the early 2000s when we had Bridgestone and Michelin in the sport
Motorsport, two brilliant tyre companies, both spending freely in terms of development and producing great racing along the way. I think it was great racing. Yeah, we had a few funny things going on. The FIA were bringing in grooved tyres, and we had an emphasis starting to build on pit stops as a solution to Formula One being boring. Personally, I think that was a solution to a problem that didn't exist in the first place, but we'll get onto that in a second. Then we get to Indy 05, when Michelin are hung out to dry effectively. Yes, it was their problem in that they had a tyre that wouldn't work on the banking at Indianapolis, but nobody in Formula One effectively covered that situation for them. And on race day, we had the horrendous situation of all the Michelin runners not taking part, and the race being a Bridgestone race only, with only 6 starters and 6 finishers. Ludicrous, probably the most embarrassing moment in the history of Formula One, certainly since the World Championship was introduced. Then in 2006, a year later, with Ferrari still on Bridgestone and winning races, as we know, going very well, Michelin were accused at the Italian Grand Prix in public by Ferrari, but backed up by most of the heavyweights of the sport, of a flagrant and deliberate breach of the technical regulations. This was all over the design of the grooves they had in their tyres. And if you consider that Michelin are they're a brilliant company, and most motorsport people love having them around, and B, if there's any company in the world that is super conservative and isn't going to stray over that line of illegality, it's going to be Michelin. Nobody backed them up, and so exit one very good French tyre company. So that's the reason we don't have Michelin in Formula One at the moment, and I think if none of that had happened, probably they'd still be in the sport. Bridgestone then took over, spending freely on development, doing a great job in Formula One, producing the tyres that enabled the Mark Webbers and the Lewis Hamiltons to drive at the 99%, of which they fondly look back. But that couldn't last forever either, because the economic recession came. Bridgestone is a Japanese company. Japanese companies in Formula One have a history of continually reviewing their involvement, and Bridgestone were no different in that. And at the end of 2010, they pulled out, mainly because of the world recession. That left Formula One in a very, very difficult situation. There was no obvious replacement for either Bridgestone, and there's no way in the world that Michelin were going to come back in, certainly in the short or medium term. And for a while, Formula One were actually looking at producing their own tyres in-house and branding the sidewalls with, I don't know, some commercial sponsor to pay for it all. Pirelli then came on the horizon as a company that didn't have a huge development budget, but what it did have was a lot of panache, Italian feel, creativity, and it would do a lot for the promotion of Formula One. Great, let's bring Pirelli in. But they came in at a time when Formula One was going through a lot of changes in the way it perceived itself. Market surveys were being done, expensive market surveys being done left, right and crazy. Bland questions like, would you like to see more overtaking in Formula One? Answer, tick, yes. The questions, of course, were not worded along the lines of, would you like to see more overtaking in Formula One, if it meant that the drivers were going to have to run much shorter race stints and the tyres were going to have to be managed much more carefully, which meant that the drivers are going to be driving at 85% rather than 99%, or worse, the cars were all going to look identical. None of these extras were added to the questions. It was just, we've got to have more overtaking, we've got to have more pit stops. And so that's what happened. Pirelli came in, and quite rightly, they've fitted into that template. They've said we can reduce our development costs by building tyres that last for whatever it is, 8, 12, 20 laps. We can have a mix and match policy with compounds. That'll be good for the racing as well, because that's what the fans want. And here we are. I don't think anybody is in a position, in other words, to criticise Pirelli for the products that they deliver. Pirelli are doing what Formula One wants them to do, and Formula One want them to do this because they kind of messed up the last 7 or 8 years of the way they've run tyre companies in Formula One. So that's my little rant on that one, and I feel quite strongly about that, and I think it's inappropriate for the drivers after the race, even if they think that, to say that we're driving at 85%, it's really boring, we're not enjoying this, because those quotes will be taken out of context and they will be related directly to Pirelli. And if anyone's to blame for this, it's not Pirelli, it's the teams for allowing it to happen in the first place. And guess what? The drivers are part of those teams and they reflect the team policy. So I think that needs to be remembered. Okay, lots going on in the Sepang weekend. We've covered some of it. We don't have enough time to cover all of it in detail. And then there was GP2 as well. GP2 began its lead championship series at Sepang with 2 good races. The first won by Fabio Lima. Good to see Racing Engineering on the centre of the podium for the first time in over a year. Fabio's a driver that was with them last year, and a good win for him. He didn't lead from the start. Stefano Coletti, the Monaco-based Italian, was on the pole. He led and was looking very good, but had a tyre problem, but made up for it with a win on Sunday.
Credit to Mitch Evans, the young New Zealander making his GP2 debut. He finished third in the Sunday race, and another GP2 debutant, Conor Daly, the young American, only got a phone call on the Monday before Sepang to take part, and he finished an excellent 7th on Sunday. So I caught up with Conor after his race.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this weekend. I mean, it all came together very late, and you know, we came in with a mission to try and just learn as much as I could about the car, and you know, help this new team get into the series. And I didn't have a lot of expectations, but sure enough, we came out with some points, so I was extremely pumped about that.
When did you get to hear that you were going to be racing here in Sepang?
I only knew on Monday night that I was going to be here racing, and when I got that notification, I didn't really believe it. So sure enough, my dad booked a flight, and I was on my way to Asia, which is a place that I mean, I've never been here before, so it's a whole new experience.
You won that Indian MRF championship over the winter. Congratulations on that. I don't suppose that really prepared you for the weather, however, that we've got here in Sepang this weekend.
Actually, it was almost, I think, hotter than it is there. In the last race in Chennai, it was I think a track temperature of 50 Celsius, which was, I mean, that was hot. But here, I think it's a different kind of heat, more humid here, and it was tough for sure. I mean, drivers yesterday couldn't even get out of their cars, so it was a challenge. But I enjoy it. I enjoy tough conditions.
You sweat a lot, like your dad used to sweat a lot, but
yeah.
you look great. As I say, it's only a few minutes ago since you stepped out of the car. Looks like you set second fastest lap as well, so the pace is there. You must be feeling we can do this. We can do GP2.
Exactly. I think the part when I heard on the in lap that I did the second fastest race lap, I said, well, I was kind of surprised. I mean, I could see the leaders in front of me the whole race, so I knew they weren't pulling away, and I knew the pack was right there. So I just wanted to keep them there and hopefully have some for them at the end. But unfortunately, we just had a little bit too much oversteer, I think, mid-race, and just had to be careful with the tires. But the pace in general, I impressed myself, and I think the team was very happy, and I'm just thankful to have got the opportunity.
Well, dare I say, the result today kind of reflects all the work of the winter, the number of different cars you've driven, the amount of travel you've done, the amount of racing you've done. Just try and sum that up in terms of the number of cars you have driven and what the winter's been like.
Well, I actually thought of this about a week ago. Since October of last year, I've driven World Series 3.5, Indycar, GP2, GP3, MRF. And that's a lot. So I've been
surprised you didn't go to New Zealand for the Toyota series.
Well, yeah, I know, me too. So it's been great to have all these opportunities. I think it's really just kept me in the game, kept me in the zone. But I know I made mistakes last year and made some pretty big ones. And and the way my dad looks at it is we have to fix those. We turn weaknesses into strength. So it was honestly a really tough off season for a part of it, because it's not fun focusing on your weaknesses, but I think it's helped me. I mean, I just wanted to prove this year that I am really working at it, and I'm really trying to get there. And as an American, we're not usually looked at as extremely hard workers, but I really want to try and just prove that and get somewhere in this European racing world.
Conor, how much did the US Grand Prix in Austin change things, if at all, in terms of energy behind you and sense of direction of where you're going?
Well, it was awesome. I mean, the Grand Prix in Austin was huge. There were so many people there. A lot of people pumped up about Americans in Formula One, wanting to see one there. We had Rossi there, who was also a great addition. So I think it helped the whole U.S. kind of push to get a driver in Formula One. But it's still very tough. I mean, it was great to see all the support, great to have so many people there, but still it's a tough game. As Americans, we don't score points that often in GP2, so it's cool. I'm excited, and it kind of proves to myself that I can also compete at this level. You never know when you jump into something like GP2. I mean, this is right below F1. I mean, these cars are fast, so. When you can run at the front, run in the lead pack in this series, it's a very good thing for your confidence.
Conor Daly, a young American, making the most of the opportunity he was given in the Sepang GP2 race. Other thoughts on the Petronas Malaysian Grand Prix? Well, Rob Wilson said that Felipe Massa's been outperforming Fernando Alonso. I wouldn't go that far, to be honest. I think he's done very well. His lap times are good in qualifying. But I thought his race performance was, dare I say it, disappointing, because when your big star driver Fernando Alonso does have an issue like that, that's the day you rely on your other driver, your other quick driver, your number 2 driver, well-balanced team, to step up to the plate and get some serious points. But Felipe had a very difficult opening lap as well and spent the rest of the race recovering from that. But we saw from his late race lap times how competitive the Ferrari would have been. Who knows where they were? Hart says they probably would have split the Red Bulls and the Mercedes, but we'll never know. We'll have to wait until China for the answer to that one. Adrian Sutil, again, looking brilliant in the dry, just fabulous to watch in Friday. Didn't run on Friday afternoon in the wet, which told a little bit in Q3 when it was wet, and that was because there was a suspected engine oil seal leak, I think it was, on the Mercedes Sahara Force India. But in Q1 and Q2, just beautiful to watch. That kind of went away in the race when he went off on the opening lap out of the pit lane, going onto the grid along with about 5 other drivers, including Mark Webber and both Williams drivers. So the floor of the Force India was not in great shape, and Paul di Resta actually drove very well, I thought, in the race. Shame that both of those had to retire as a result of, well, Ron Toronak would say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Of course, what they were doing was putting in the captive wheel nut, keeping up with the Joneses, along with all the midfield teams now going to the captive wheel nut on the wheels for faster wheel changing. And guess what? They could get the wheel off, but they couldn't get it back on. Looks as if the sleeve had expanded somewhat in the heat of Sepang, something would only show up really if there was that sort of fault under that sort of heat and load. So bad luck for Sahara Force India. I thought, again, Esteban Gutierrez looked very good in the wet. This guy has a lot of touch, more touch, I have to say, than I ever saw in GP2 or GP3, and I was very impressed with his driving in the wet. Not that it amounted to much, of course, because so far as he was concerned, he was out of qualifying when it was still dry, but quite a good combo there. And Nico Hülkenberg driving very well for Sauber, making up for that huge drama and disappointment in the Australian Grand Prix. Well, that's all we have time for now, and this abbreviated version of the Racer's Edge. We still have a bit of a Malaysian hum on our amplifier, which is why we're doing it this way, but we'll be back again next week. From the offices of F1 Racing Magazine in Teddington, lots of eye shields and bits of paper everywhere, typewriters clacking. Oh no, sorry, that was Clark Kent when he was a journalist in Superman. Lots of Supermen there though at the Haymarket building. We'll be there talking to the writers, talking to the people who are putting the next edition of F1 Racing together, so that'll be a lot of fun as we look back again at Sepang. I'm sure there'll be a lot more to say, and ahead to the Chinese Grand Prix at Shanghai. Till then, thanks for joining us. Take care.